Welcome to a deep dive into some foundational arguments, ideas that really reshaped our understanding of human nature itself.
Yeah, we're definitely moving beyond simple psychology today.
We really are. We're stepping into high philosophy, challenging, the very notion of what it means to be a coherent, unified individual.
And the sources we're drawing on today are, well, they're intense, but they offer really profound insights.
Right.
They come from that dynamic intersection of psychoanalysis and classical philosophy. We're sort of tracking this lineage of thought.
Like from Nietzsche, Freud, Hegel, those big names.
Exactly. Thinkers who systematically dismantled that old idea, the one where the human mind is just a simple, rational engine.
They really showed the layers, didn't they? The conflicts, sometimes the explosive complexity hiding underneath.
Absolutely, revealing all that complexity.
So our mission here, for you listening, is to try and uncover those core philosophical ideas.
Yeah, the big arguments about selfhood, about morality, consciousness.
Right, the stuff that really shattered that old goldfish bowl model.
That idea that the mind is just transparent to itself, we're moving past that.
We'll explore how these, well, quite radical ideas influence everything from our personal ethics, maybe, to the structure of modern society.
Giving you, hopefully, a clearer, deeper understanding of just how nuanced, complex, and, yes, sometimes problematic the human mind really is.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where should we start? Maybe with one of the most provocative claims in Western thought.
Sounds good. You mean the idea that being a person isn't a given?
Exactly, that it's an exceptional accomplishment, not just a birthright.
It's a huge shift in perspective, really seismic. We tend to operate daily assuming that people around us, ourselves included, are fully realized, coherent individuals.
Just sort of whole.
Right. But Nietzsche, in his characteristic radical fashion, comes along and says, no, a unified self or a genuine person, that's not a given state at all.
It's something difficult, rare even.
Profoundly difficult and rare. A rare achievement.
The sources quote him pretty bluntly on this. Something like, one should not assume that many humans are people.
That's the one. He argues the overwhelming majority just present pieces and fragments of man.
Pieces and fragments.
Yeah, you have to kind of add them up for a complete man to appear.
So most of us are just walking collections of, half-finished projects, contradictory impulses, not unified selves.
That sounds about right. And maybe a bit exhausting, as you said. It's a description of the perpetually conflicted soul.
It feels deeply relatable, actually.
And Nietzsche sees this fragmentation as the fundamental problem. It's the core issue of the human condition for him.
So his goal, then, expressed through Zarathustra, I think.
Yes, most vividly through Zarathustra, is that mastery required to compose into one and bring together what is fragment and riddle and dreadful chance.
Composing it all together.
Achieving that internal unity. That's the ultimate definition of health for Nietzsche, both psychological and philosophical. It's the mark of self-mastery.
Okay, so if that's the goal, what's the mechanism? How do you turn those fragments into a coherent whole? You mentioned sublimation.
Exactly. Sublimation is the primary means to achieve this unity. And he links it directly to overcoming a very specific emotional state. Resentment.
Resentment. We probably need to define that carefully.
We do. It's fundamentally connected to repression. Think of it as a kind of chronic psychological sickness.
Okay.
It arises from a drive, an impulse that's been stifled, denied, maybe turned inward.
So the energy doesn't just disappear?
No, not at all. When you can't express a primal impulse externally, the energy festers. It leads to spite, bitterness.
And maybe creating moral systems that condemn the very thing you can't have or express.
Precisely. You invent moralities to condemn the force you yourself cannot possess or safely express.
And if you don't overcome that, you can't really affirm life fully.
You absolutely cannot. To get to that highest possible affirmation of existence, concepts like amor fati, the love of fate.
Or the eternal recurrence test.
Or that ultimate test, yes, the eternal recurrence. You must first overcome all resentment.
Amor fati isn't just accepting things, is it? It's more active than that.
Much more. It demands not just acceptance of your history, but this radical, almost joyful desire that every single past moment, every pain, every mistake, every win should repeat forever, eternally.
You couldn't wish for that if you're still bitter about something you repressed.
Impossible. You can't wish for that repetition if you harbor resentment towards a repressed drive or some past suffering. So overcoming it means affirming all of your drive.
Okay, but affirming all drives, that needs some clarification. To someone hearing this for the first time, it might sound like chaos.
Like total self-indulgence, letting everything run wild.
Yeah, dismantling all boundaries.
And that, for Nietzsche, would be the path straight back to disintegration, the exact opposite of the unified self.
So the drives need affirming but not chaotic expression.
Right, they need to be harnessed. The strong individual learns to harness one's drives for concerted, unified expression. It's like an act of psychological orchestration.
An internal orchestra.
Kind of. And Nietzsche gives us a clear contrast to show what this looks like internally, the difference between fragmentation and unity.
Let's break that down. What does the fragmented state, the weak will, look like?
He describes the weak will as being characterized by the multitude and disgregation of impulses.
Disgregation, like they're all pulling apart.
Exactly. Imagine an internal civil war. Desires pulling you in 10 different directions at once.
That sounds exhausting.
It leads to oscillation, paralysis, a distinct lack of gravity, you could say. No clear direction in life.
The kind of person who's always starting things, stopping things.
And feeling drained by their own internal noise. Yes.
Okay, so contrast that internal noise with the strong will.
The strong will is the result of coordinating those very same impulses, but under a single predominant organizing impulse.
So there's a hierarchy. A leader, kind of.
A hierarchy, yes, led by a dominant purpose or direction. And this results in precision and clarity of direction.
The difference between a mob and an army.
That's a good analogy. A disorganized mob versus a synchronized marching army. The energy from every drive, even the aggressive ones, gets channeled toward that single overarching goal.
And that leads to mastery, self-composition.
That's the idea. Mastery and self-composition.
Now, this concept of sublimation, this is where Nietzsche really starts to diverge from, or maybe challenge, Freud's initial framework.
It is. And the sources highlight two major theoretical gains, you could say, in Nietzsche's view, compared to the Freudian approach at the time.
That's the first one.
The first is crucial, philosophically. The element of social valuation just drops out.
Meaning?
Well, for Freud, at least early on, sublimation often meant diverting a raw drive, like sexual energy, into something society approves of, like art or science.
Getting the social stamp of approval.
Right. Nietzsche doesn't require that. For him, sublimation is purely an internal project of self-composition. It doesn't matter if society applauds the result or not. It's about internal mastery.
Okay, that's a big difference. And the second point, it relates to the drives themselves.
Yes. The notion of desexualization drops out entirely.
Desexualization.
Freud initially focused almost exclusively on the libidinal drives, eros, as the main source material for sublimation.
The sexual drives, basically.
Primarily, yes. Nietzsche, though, allows for a whole multiplicity of drives. Aggressive drives, destructive ones, power-seeking drives. He saw all of these as equally capable of being sublimated.
So a broader scope.
Much broader. He saw this as a conceptual gain because it acknowledges the full spectrum of human impulses that can be harnessed and directed towards a unifying purpose. He was talking about the aggressive impulse long before Freud formalized thanatos, the death drive.
This is fascinating, and it leads us right into maybe Nietzsche's most challenging idea, the one that seems to just fly in the face of centuries of philosophy, his stance on truth.
Ah, yes. The idea that falsity can be healthy.
How do we even begin to reconcile that? He seems to suggest self-deception can be good for you.
This is where his drive for health overrides almost every other value. It's a critical point. He makes this really radical claim that self-deception, even ignorance of your deeper drives, can sometimes be fundamentally healthy phenomena.
Which goes against, well, pretty much everything. Traditional morality, Christian morality. A lot of philosophy sees truth as the ultimate value.
Exactly. Post-Socratic Western thought, broadly speaking, holds truth as this categorical ultimate value. You have to reject all falsity, all myth, all self-deception, no matter the cost.
But Nietzsche saw danger in that absolute pursuit.
A huge danger. For him, subordinating everything, your health, your culture, your personal stability, to the relentless pursuit of absolute unsparing truth, that's actually a form of pathology. It's a nihilistic tendency in disguise.
Wow. So sometimes health needs lies.
He argues that the health of an individual, or even a whole culture, is sometimes built upon certain lies, myths, and self-deception. They're like necessary scaffolding.
Scaffolding.
Yeah. The absolute truth, if you took it neat, undiluted, might just be too much. Too much for the human psyche to handle without disintegrating the identity you need to function.
So truth is just one value among others.
For Nietzsche, yes. And sometimes the will to life, the will to power, requires a beautiful illusion, a necessary falsehood, to keep going.
That's a really powerful transition point, because the moment we accept that self-deception might be necessary, we've basically accepted the existence of the unconscious, haven't we?
You absolutely have. You've opened the door to that hidden, potentially truth-evading part of the self.
Which is exactly what Freud steps in to examine systematically.
Yeah.
#tag2, the deep architecture of the unconscious mind.
Precisely. Freud's work, you could argue, is the most profound philosophical disruption of the 20th century, maybe even beyond. He systematically overturned that whole Enlightenment picture of the mind.
The transparent goldfish bowl idea you mentioned earlier.
Exactly that. He just shattered the notion that we are these self-sufficient, autonomous, rational agents whose reasons for acting are always fully accessible just by looking inward.
So the idea that our intentions, our beliefs, our desires are all just floating clearly in view, ready for us to make perfectly rational choices, Freud basically said, nope, not that simple.
Not even close. We now have to approach self-knowledge less like looking in a mirror and more like, well, like an archaeological dig.
Digging down through layers.
And that digging reveals this deep architecture governed by rules totally foreign to our conscious thought, what Freud called the primary process.
So we see this most clearly in dreams.
That's where it's most visible, yes.
Yes.
In dream work. We really need to define the two main mechanisms he identified there, condensation and displacement.
Okay, let's start with condensation. How does the unconscious use that?
Condensation is the mechanism where the unconscious combines multiple ideas or memories or emotional charges all into a single compact representation.
Like packing things tightly together.
Very tightly. Think of a dream image that seems simple on the surface. Maybe a single strange-looking person.
Okay.
But then, in analysis, this figure turns out to be a composite. It's your mother and your childhood teacher and maybe that political figure you dislike.
All mashed into one.
All those threads are condensed into one representation. It makes the content incredibly dense, but also extremely obscure to the conscious mind trying to understand it.
Right. Hard to unravel. And the other mechanism, displacement.
Displacement is about shifting the emotional intensity. The unconscious moves the feeling, the affective charge, the significance
On the real source.
from the original object or idea onto a substitute. Something that's often trivial or peripheral or seems totally irrelevant.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say you have intense anxiety about a major life decision, like changing careers.
Okay.
That anxiety might get displaced onto, say, a minor household chore like doing the dishes. Suddenly, doing the dishes feels impossibly difficult, overwhelmingly terrifying.
While the real issue, the career change, gets pushed aside.
It stays comfortably obscured, exactly. These two, condensation and displacement, they're the key vicissitudes of representation in the unconscious, how things get twisted and represented down there.
Beyond these dynamic processes, the source material also talks about symbolism, psychoanalytic symbolism in a strict sense, and it emphasizes this symbolism is semantically opaque. Why opaque? What does that mean here?
Opacity is the defining feature. It's opaque because the symbol's meaning is either repressed, so the subject literally can't access the connection, or it's an unreflectively given, maybe even universal symbol whose meaning isn't consciously understood.
Like the classic example, the snake.
Exactly, the snake symbolizing a penis. In the strict sense, this meaning is established without needing condensation or displacement to forge the link. The connection is already there, fixed, or it's inaccessible because of repression.
So the person dreaming just sees a snake.
They experience the snake purely as a snake, completely unaware of its latent, fixed sexual significance in that context. The meaning is hidden, opaque.
And this opacity is critical for understanding how the mind actually achieves wish fulfillment, right? That FW concept. How does the unconscious get satisfaction from these opaque symbols?
It's fascinating. The efficacy of wish fulfillment, it doesn't rely on conscious recognition or simple metaphor. It rests on this profound, unconscious belief in the absolute identity of the symbol and the symbolized object.
Identity, as in they are the same thing?
In the unconscious's view, yes. The symbol is treated as if it is the thing itself. The unconscious belief structure leads the symbol to be mistaken for the symbolized and treated as if it were.
Wow. So when the unconscious uses a symbol in a dream or fantasy,
it's acting as if that representation is providing the real satisfaction of the wish.
so it's not just thinking about the desired thing. It's an internal act where the mental image becomes the thing for that moment. That's a huge difference.
It's a massive distinction. You can contrast that powerful belief in identity with other kinds of symbolic actions. Think about that sorcerer figure sticking pins in an effigy, a doll. The sorcerer performs an operation on the symbol, and they apprehend that as an operation on the person it represents.
Right.
But they don't necessarily hold a deep unconscious conviction that the effigy is literally the enemy. They know it's a doll, a representation used for magic.
But in Freudian wish fulfillment.
It's driven by that more primitive, powerful sense of identity, a level of belief the conscious mind typically can't access or challenge.
This whole framework, it must force a major extension of what we usually call common sense psychology, or CP.
Absolutely.
We normally think of intentional action as, desire plus belief leads to action, a rational calculation. Where does Freud take us beyond that simple picture?
Freud forces us to acknowledge all sorts of actions that aren't fully rational in that standard CP sense. We enter the realm of non-intentional acts, or acts that aren't purely intentional.
Like what?
Well, first, there's what the source calls subintentional action. This is where an action is caused by a desire, but it lacks that clear instrumental belief needed for a purely rational choice.
So the person acts, but they can't really give you the why in a clear, logical way.
Pretty much. They act, but the instrumental reason isn't fully formed or accessible.
And then there are these other expressions.
Like,
the ones with archaeology but no teleology. That phrase really stuck with me.
it's a great phrase, archaeology but no teleology.
What are those?
These are expressions that are rooted in a deep history. That's archaeology. A history of feeling, conflict, motive.
Okay, so they come from somewhere.
Yes, but they are not directed toward a specific future goal or outcome. They have no teleology. They aren't for anything in a practical sense.
Like just raw expression.
Exactly. Clenching your fists in anguish, that nervous laugh some people have, certain involuntary ethics. These are examples. They express an internal state or conflict, but they aren't strategically deployed to achieve something in the world.
So Freud's work just blows open the range of human motivation and expression.
It shows us that motives and expressions run far deeper and are far weirder than simple, self-aware, rational choice can account for. #2.3. The integration of contradictory beliefs.
Okay, this leads us straight into what seems like the most profound theoretical puzzle that psychoanalysis throws up for philosophy. It's this issue of integrating beliefs that flat out contradict each other.
It's a huge challenge. How do you make sense of a dynamically unconscious belief, something powerful driving behavior that the conscious person knows is false?
Right. The source gives that example of the person with an unconscious belief. I am a thief.
Yes. And they manifest this belief maybe through unexplained anxiety or this sort of free-floating, inarticulate guilt.
Or that weird feeling like they've gotten away with something after getting a gift, or even their earned salary.
Exactly. But if you ask this person consciously, did you earn your salary? They'll sincerely say, yes, of course.
They have a firm grip on the truth, consciously.
While simultaneously manifesting the false belief unconsciously through feelings and anxieties, it's a stark contradiction living side by side in one person.
Which creates this immediate therapeutic paradox, right? If the goal is self-knowledge, the patient somehow needs to consciously engage with this belief, I am a thief, even though they know factually it's not true.
Precisely. So what does the integration of such a false belief actually look like? It's tricky.
Yeah, it sounds like a tightrope walk.
It really is. And we have to be clear first about what integration is not.
Okay, what isn't it?
It is absolutely not about simple elimination. You can't just erase these beliefs.
Why not?
Because they're robust. They're rooted in deep fantasy, maybe trauma, complex defense mechanisms. They require transformation, working through, not just dismiss like a simple factual error.
Okay, so not elimination. What else is it not?
It's also not about making the belief subject to modifiability by deliberation. You can't just sit down and rationally choose to stop believing you're a thief on that deep unconscious level.
No matter how many logical arguments you make against it.
Conscious reasoning doesn't directly reach it in that way.
And critically, I imagine integration can't mean losing your grip on reality.
Absolutely. Critical point. Take that other example, the patient who fears going blind if she doesn't see her mother every day.
Right.
If integration meant she just started fully believing without qualification that she would go blind, well, that wouldn't be integration. That would be psychosis.
A complete break from reality.
In a terrifying rupture of the real. So the goal isn't literal belief in the falsehood.
So the path isn't about changing the external facts, like proving you're not a thief.
No. It's about changing your relation to the internal contradiction itself.
The key requirement, then, the source says, is acknowledgement and acceptance of the reality of one's psychic life.
That's the core. It sounds simple, maybe, but it demands radical emotional honesty.
Honesty about feelings and fantasies you might find unpleasant, shameful.
Exactly. An emotional openness, particularly toward feelings, fantasies, or internal realities that feel repugnant or difficult to own.
So the belief, I am a thief, isn't factually true.
But the feeling of being a fraud, or maybe the underlying wish to take what isn't yours, or the guilt associated with receiving something, that psychic reality is real.
Acknowledging that is the first step.
It's the absolute prerequisite for integration.
So the ultimate achievement, then, is described as the full, stable incorporation of the false belief into a single, unified, self-conscious perspective. What does that actually look like in practice? How does someone behave differently?
It often manifests as a change in expression, a shift in their stance towards themselves and the conflict.
Okay.
The person who achieves this kind of integration can actually give voice to both sides of the conflict, the thief and the earner, in that example.
But how? Well, that just sounded contradictory.
They can do it with a kind of good-humored irony, the source suggests, with self-acceptance. The internal tension hasn't vanished entirely, perhaps.
But it's manageable.
It's manageable. They've established a settled, more apt pattern of relating to the conflict itself. The conflict stops being a source of paralyzing distress and becomes, maybe, a source of depth, complexity, even self-awareness.
Philosophically, this really throws a wrench into some foundational assumptions, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Particularly that idea may be associated with someone like Donald Davidson, that when we try to understand someone, we have to assume they're basically rational.
It really challenges that principle of charity in interpretation.
Right. If a person can genuinely hold two flatly contradictory beliefs simultaneously, how do we maintain their coherence as a subject we can understand?
We have to adjust our standard of what counts as a successful explanation when dealing with these deep contradictions uncovered by psychoanalysis. The goal maybe shifts from needing to render the person perfectly rational to simply needing to render them intelligible.
Intelligible,
Yeah.
but not necessarily rational in the strictest sense.
Exactly. We're separating general intelligibility, just making sense of their total pattern of actions, feelings, expressions, from specifically rational intelligibility, which demands logical consistency above all else.
So it suggests that sometimes the most accurate, most functional way to understand a complex human being is actually to attribute contradictory beliefs to them.
It acknowledges the mind's profound capacity for internal division, for schism, without writing the person off as simply incoherent.
This whole discussion really highlights the deep philosophical roots and implications of psychoanalysis. It didn't just spring out of nowhere. Let's maybe trace some of that lineage. Starting with Schopenhauer. He seems to have anticipated a lot of core Freudian ideas decades earlier.
Schopenhauer is a truly stunning, almost uncanny forerunner. An unconscious forerunner, you might say.
A conscious forerunner like that.
He established several crucial points of shared ground with the later Freudian system. First, there's his strict psychological determinism.
Meaning everything mental has a cause.
Every mental event is determined by prior causes, yes. No pure randomness in the psyche. Second, this idea of mind-body parallelism.
Mental states reflecting bodily states.
Often paralleling deep, instinctual bodily conditions or drives. The mind reflecting the body's underlying strivings.
And maybe, most distinctively, his economic model of motivation. That seems very Freudian.
It really does. The economic model, for Schopenhauer, pleasure is strictly negative.
Negative, how so?
It's merely the removal of an irritant, the temporary cessation of striving, the relief from pain or tension. It's not about achieving some positive state of bliss.
Just getting back to neutral, basically.
Pretty much. The
Yeah.
human condition for him is defined by this relentless, often blind, striving will. This negative definition of pleasure heavily influenced Freud's early work, particularly his concept of the pleasure principle, the drive to reduce tension.
And Schopenhauer actually described the core mechanisms of neurosis, didn't he? Even without using Freud's terms like repression and resistance.
He did, quite remarkably. He described the will, this powerful, often unconscious force, as actively prohibiting the intellect from dwelling on certain painful or unacceptable thoughts.
That sounds exactly like repression.
It's the essence of it. And he noted that we have this extreme reluctance to think things that wound our pride or interfere with our wishes.
Which is resistance.
Clearly resistance. He even observed that if the intellect can't somehow assimilate the reality that the will rejects, then madness or neurosis can break in. The mind fractures under the pressure of unacknowledged reality.
So he saw the whole cycle. The traumatic trigger, the repression, the resulting symptoms or distortions, and the active resistance against knowing the truth.
He saw the essential dynamics of the traumatic theory of neurosis, decades before Freud and Breuer.
And this leads right to his therapeutic insight, doesn't it?
It does. He claimed that basic soundness of mind requires the intellect to fully assimilate every new adverse event, no matter how traumatic.
Assimilate meaning?
Meaning to incorporate it intellectually and emotionally into one's understanding of oneself and the world, to digest the reality, however painful.
And that connects directly to the psychoanalytic goal.
Absolutely. It links directly to the core psychoanalytic aim, making the repressed unconscious conscious. Why? In order to deprive them of their power, as Schopenhauer might say, by incorporating them into a working, acknowledged consciousness. Bringing them into the light dissolves their compulsive force.
Okay, so from Schopenhauer's kind of proto-psychology, let's shift to Hegel. His philosophy of self-consciousness offers a really powerful, though maybe less obvious, frame for understanding the analytic process itself, particularly ideas like recognition and intersubjectivity.
Yes, the psychoanalytic process is fundamentally intersubjective. It's not just introspection. It's a very specialized kind of communication.
Communication of what?
Of the analysand's unconscious material, their feelings, fantasies, conflicts, not just to themselves, but crucially to the analyst.
And the analyst's role is key here.
Absolutely. When this deep, often previously unspeakable or unformulated content is witnessed, interpreted, maybe just patiently held and acknowledged by the analyst, that act becomes a crucial, real-world form of recognition.
Being seen, being understood at that deep level.
Exactly. And this unique, sustained, intersubjective relating, this process of being recognized in one's psychic reality, leads to what Hegel described as the elaboration of consciousness.
Elaboration. Like building something new.
New shapes of knowing emerge, as Hegel might put it, borrowing from his phenomenology. The patient literally develops new ways of understanding themselves, their history, their place in the world, through the analytic dialogue. The relationship itself fosters new psychic structure.
That's a powerful way to think about it. And the sources suggest we need to look beyond Hegel's most famous dialectic here, the master-slave one.
Yeah, the lordship and bondage dialectic is important for understanding struggles for external recognition hierarchies. But for the internal dynamics often at play in analysis, it's incredibly fruitful to extend the concept of recognition to Hegel's figure of the unhappy consciousness.
The unhappy consciousness. I remember that from the Phenomenology. It's a really complex figure.
It is, and some philosophers describe it as the crucial motor of the dialectic in that book. It drives the whole process forward.
Why is it so important for understanding analysis?
Because the unhappy consciousness is defined by its deep internal contradiction. It's constantly trying to fix its identity onto something permanent or absolute, like an unchanging God or a rigid personality ideal, while simultaneously experiencing itself as mutable, changing, flawed, incomplete. There's this constant internal split, the sense of alienation from its own ideal, from its own being.
That sounds very much like the internal conflicts we see in therapy.
Exactly. And it's this internal struggle, this perpetual sense of alienation and contradiction that Hegel suggests drives the self to constantly seek new forms of understanding, new ways to reconcile the split. It provides the engine for profound self-discovery and change, the kind that happens in successful analysis.
Okay, fascinating connection. Now, finally, in this lineage, we have to turn to Wittgenstein. He actually engaged with psychoanalysis personally, but he also offered a really profound, sustained philosophical critique of its scientific claims.
He did. Wittgenstein is a crucial figure here, both as someone who saw value in analysis and as one of its sharpest philosophical critics.
What was his core critique? It was about the evidence, wasn't it?
Yes, he challenged the very basis of psychoanalytic evidence, particularly regarding interpretations of things like dreams or neurotic symptoms.
How so?
His core critique is that free associations, while they might feel psychologically insightful or compelling to the patient, they do not provide reliable evidence for the supposed unconscious causes of those dreams or symptoms.
Why not? The connections often feel so right.
Because, Wittgenstein argues, we fundamentally lack verifiable criteria to distinguish a genuine veridical perception of a causal link from just an imaginative connection made after the fact, a retrospective rationalization.
So if a patient says, I dreamt of that crumbling tower because I felt my father's authority was weakening yesterday.
How do we prove that connection is the actual unconscious cause of the dream image, and not just a plausible story the patient constructs later when associating?
There's no independent way to check.
Exactly. The memory of the original unconscious dream-forming activity is inaccessible, unverifiable. The opacity of the associations, the gap between the event and the interpretation, makes it impossible, in a strict scientific sense, to distinguish a real causal link from a merely imaginative or persuasive one.
So for Wittgenstein, psychoanalysis looks less like science and more like...
More like creating a compelling narrative or offering a persuasive picture, a new way of seeing things, not necessarily a theory of objective causation.
Yet he didn't just dismiss it entirely. He saw personal value in it.
He absolutely did. He personally admitted that psychoanalysis enables genuine discoveries about oneself. He saw it as a deeply valuable process for self-understanding.
But discovering things about yourself isn't the same as solving ethical problems.
That was his point.
Yeah.
He famously likened the process to eating from the tree of knowledge. It gives you profound, maybe unsettling insight into your own origins, your mechanisms, your hidden motives. But it doesn't automatically give you a prescriptive moral guide on how to live rightly or solve ethical dilemmas. It illuminates the is, not necessarily the ought.
Now, this critique about causality, it seems to rely on a specific idea of how interpretation should work. Critics call it the aesthetic model.
Yes, that's a counterargument. The aesthetic model critique suggests Wittgenstein assumes that for interpretation to be valid, one association must equal one definitive interpretation, like a simple code.
A one-to-one mapping.
Right. One symbol, one meaning, one cause. Clinical critics argue this misses how psychoanalytic interpretation actually works in practice.
How does it work then, according to them?
The therapeutic value, they argue, lies less in finding one single correct causal link, and more in observing converging evidence from multiple, often ambiguous associations over time.
So patterns emerging from different places.
Exactly. While no single piece of free association might be scientifically verifiable as the sole cause, the repeated convergence of diverse psychological material, dreams, slips of the tongue, relationship patterns, memories, all pointing towards a common underlying theme, like a fear of abandonment. That convergence, even if each strand is ambiguous, provides a powerful interpretive direction. It aids understanding and fosters self-acknowledgement far more effectively than searching for a single elusive proof. It's about the weight of converging patterns, not isolated causal links. #tag reason, imagination, and expression.
Okay, so we've established that self-knowledge, especially in the psychoanalytic vein, is this inherently messy, transformative process. It's about integration, not just simple, clear reflection.
Right. It's crucial to emphasize that distinction again. Self-knowledge isn't merely reflective or intellectual. That kind of intellectualizing can actually be a defense mechanism, a way to avoid real feeling and change.
So it's more of a practical project?
Intrinsically transformative, yes. A practical project of changing one's relation to oneself.
This brings us back maybe to classical philosophy, like the Socratic ideal.
In a way, yes. The Socratic ideal that reason, logos making, the ability to give a coherent, reasoned account of oneself and one's motivations, should ideally rule the psyche.
Reason guiding the whole soul.
Exercising foresight on behalf of the whole soul, trying to guide its integration, make the self more coherent, less fragmented. The process of self-knowledge, in this light, is less about discovering new factual information and more about undoing destructive patterns of self-relation, making the self more intelligible and functional.
To understand that transformation better, maybe we need to clarify the difference between conscious and unconscious expression, particularly how we use language. What's the linguistic marker of a conscious mental state?
The key concept here is the co-expressive gloss.
Co-expressive gloss.
A person's expression of a mental state is conscious if they can articulate its psychological significance co-expressively, meaning the explanation is offered as a unified extension of the expressive act itself.
Okay, an example might help.
Sure. If I consciously raise my hand in a meeting, and if asked, I immediately and sincerely say, I want to ask a question, then the action, raising hand, and the linguistic account of the motivation I want to ask are unified. The gloss, the explanation, extends the meaning of the act smoothly.
Got it. And conversely, unconscious expression is marked by the inability to do that.
Correct. Unconscious expression is defined by the inability to provide that kind of coherent, co-expressive gloss.
Like the passive-aggressive colleague example.
Exactly. If a colleague is making continuous passive-aggressive remarks, those remarks are clearly expressions of anger or resentment. But if you ask them directly, why are you saying these things? Are you angry?
They'll likely deny it or be unable to explain.
They'll deny the anger or rationalize the remarks in some other way, or simply be unable to articulate the true psychological significance of their behavior. They can't transition the underlying feeling, anger, into a unified, conscious, linguistic account that matches the expression. There's a disconnect.
So the very act of learning to use language for our feelings changes the nature of those feelings.
It seems to. Wittgenstein's point here is really instructive. He suggests that learning the verbal expression of pain, learning to say it hurts, actually replaces the more primitive pre-linguistic act of just crying or wincing.
Replaces it.
Or transforms it. Language isn't just a tool for describing internal states that already exist. It's a transformative capacity. It moves us from merely having or expressing a state to consciously relating to it, articulating it, bringing it into the shared space of reason and communication.
Which allows for that practical reason, that logos making, to actually work on it.
Precisely. It brings the internal state into the realm where practical reason can operate.
This clash, then, between unconscious expression and the potential for rational linguistic integration, it's perfectly captured in that case study the sources discuss. This is M. It seems like a dramatic illustration of how unchecked imagination can actively subvert reason.
Mrs. M is a powerful case. She was psychologically defined by this chronic, pervasive pattern of self-sabotage and constant complaint.
Living inside a geodesic dome of frustration and anger. That's a vivid image.
It really is. She lived inside this self-created structure of negativity that she mistakenly perceived as just, the way the world is, objective reality.
But it wasn't objective.
No. Her unconscious sustained this powerful teleological structure like an internal command or prophecy. Life shall be frustrating. Her entire psychic system was organized around proving this mandate true again and again.
So her irrationality wasn't just random confusion, it was organized. A defense.
Highly organized. It was an active pathological structure. It was characterized by this striking imperviousness to any contradictory evidence. Any good fortune was dismissed as a fluke. And this unrelenting insistence on interpreting all incoming data, everything that happened to her, through the lens of frustration and failure.
Creating an imaginative a priori. What does that mean?
It means she had created, through imagination and unconscious insistence, a kind of self-imposed, fate-like structure that dictated her reality before any actual experience, like wearing frustration-colored glasses that she couldn't take off. Good events were interpreted as mere temporary illusions, ultimately confirming the underlying frustrating reality she expected and, in a way, needed.
Needed. Why would someone need frustration? What was the deeper purpose of this self-inflicted misery?
The source suggests her relentless insistence on frustration was actually a complex protective ego strategy. It was a paradoxical way of taking control.
Control through frustration. How does that work?
By unconsciously orchestrating frustrating outcomes or interpreting things as frustrating, she avoided the greater terror of unexpected failure or humiliation coming from the outside world. It was like, if I make myself fail first, the world can't surprise me with failure.
Preemptive self-sabotage.
Exactly.
Yep.
And this strategy also served to mask deeper, much more terrifying and unacceptable omnipotent fantasies.
Omnipotent fantasies, like
Like the source mentions a hidden, savage wish to completely dominate or destroy opponents, like ripping out their heart. Fantasies of absolute power that were totally incompatible with her conscious self-image.
So the neurotic state, the pathology, was this structural conflict.
Yes, between the conscious, finite self insisting on this controlled, familiar frustration and the hidden, terrifying, unconscious fantasy of absolute, destructive omnipotence. The frustration was the compromise formation, the defense against the deeper terror.
So how did she break through? The therapeutic breakthrough wasn't just understanding this intellectually, was it?
No, intellectual understanding alone wasn't enough. The breakthrough came through something described as playfulness.
Playfulness. In therapy.
Yes, the ability to start linking different voices, different meanings, different parts of her psyche together without that former rigid insistence. Being able to hold contradictory ideas or feelings in mind simultaneously, maybe with a bit of irony or flexibility.
And this playfulness is related to reason.
It's described as a direct application of self-conscious thinking. It is practical reason, but applied to the mind's own workings.
The logos making turned inward.
Exactly. This moment of transformation, this ability to playfully relate differently to her internal world, allowed her to immediately and directly influence her whole psyche, to move toward more wholeheartedness, less rigidity.
It's human reason in action, creating a more viable, flexible internal account of reality.
Reacting to her internal and external reality by creating a more workable, linguistic, self-conscious account of it, thereby establishing a new, healthier internal order. Undoing the old, rigid, imaginative a priori. #tag system, morality, society, and epistemic anxiety.
Okay, let's shift our focus now towards the end, looking at morality and society through this psychoanalytic lens. There's a significant philosophical critique of Freud's own moral theory mentioned in the sources.
Yes, a pretty radical one.
The contention seems to be that Freud's structural model itself, the ego, the id, the superego, might actually be a symptom of moral difficulty, a kind of self-misrepresentation of how morality truly works, or should work.
That's the core of the critique. It suggests Freud got the moral architecture fundamentally wrong, specifically by confusing true conscience with its distorted, pathological false double, the superego.
So the superego, that harsh, critical, self-accusing internal voice, isn't actually genuine conscience.
According to this critique, no. The superego, with its function of hostile surveillance and self-punishment, is seen as structurally flawed. It's a defense mechanism, a symptom, not the source of true moral guidance.
If the superego is the false double, what then is truly repressed in Freud's model according to this view?
What is ultimately repressed, the argument goes, is true conscience. And crucially, this true conscience is understood as being rooted not in fear, judgment, or internalized aggression, but fundamentally in love.
Love.
Yeah.
How does that connect to conscience?
Take an example like guilty jealousy. This critique would argue that intense guilty jealousy is actually a repression of love. The superego twists the situation into self-accusation or hostility towards a rival.
Okay.
But true bad conscience, if it could be felt directly without the superego's distortion, wouldn't be self-attack. It would manifest as wholehearted love in the form of a longing for forgiveness and reunion.
A longing for connection, not judgment.
Exactly. A striving for connection where no one is excluded, rather than the hostile surveillance and self-punishment that characterize the superego's function.
So, for conscience to be healthy, the underlying love must be fundamentally non-excluding.
That's the profound philosophical insight here. If one genuinely loves one person, wholeheartedly shedding those fearful, self-centered demands and anxieties, this transformation necessarily changes the spirit in which one approaches every person. True love radiates outwards.
Whereas the superego keeps you trapped.
The superego, by contrast, creates this alienated, self-objectifying, judgmental perspective. It forces the subject into the passive position of one judged by others, constantly monitoring and condemning. This leaves no room for the potentially transformative power of that wholehearted, non-excluding love, which is seen as the root of true conscience.
This foundational understanding of human nature conflicted, driven by love and aggression, really gives weight to Freud's major contribution to political philosophy, doesn't it? His recognition that the destructive drive, thanatos, is just unconquerable.
Yes, and that it constantly threatens the very social bonds that eros, the life drive, tries to create and maintain.
His experiences during World War I seem crucial here.
Profoundly disillusioning. They formed the bedrock of his later, more pessimistic social theory. He saw the war trampling in blind fury on all that comes in its way, just sheer, unrestrained destructiveness.
And he saw the long-term damage.
He recognized that this destructive impulse wasn't just about the immediate violence. It threatened to leave this lasting legacy of embitterment, cynicism, and trauma that would actively prevent the renewal of the social bonds necessary for peace and civilization afterward.
So society itself is this constant, precarious balancing act.
A constant tension, yes, between the life-affirming, structure-building, binding forces of Eros and the inherent, apparently unconquerable destructiveness of Thanatos.
Eros builds, Thanatos threatens to tear down.
Precisely. While Eros compels us to create families, communities, complex social structures, Freud warns that any realistic political philosophy, any understanding of society, must constantly anticipate the fragility, the inherent breakability of those bonds, especially when looking at mass behavior.
His thoughts on crowds, on mass psychology.
Yes. Freud noted, quite chillingly, that in a crowd mentality, individuals often seem less checked by conscience, or, as he might put it, less constrained by the anxieties and standards of their usual social environment.
The critical faculty gets suspended.
It seems to. The crowd, he wrote, wants to be ruled and oppressed. It submits easily to authority, often through simplistic slogans, exaggeration, repetition. Independent critical thought gets drowned out.
Which provides this crucial, if sobering, psychoanalytic lens for social and political thought.
It forces us to recognize that the very mechanisms necessary for civilization, things like redirecting aggression, suppressing certain impulses, forming group identities, also inherently set up conditions that endanger society itself.
Conditions that can't just be managed by appealing to conscious rationality alone.
The irrational, unconscious forces are always present, always threatening to erupt, especially under pressure or in mass formations.
And this internal pressure, this struggle within the individual and society, leads us to our final concept for today, one that connects our psychological limits directly to societal structures. Epistemic anxiety.
Epistemic anxiety, it's a specialized term.
Anxiety specifically arising from the impulse to know. The epistemophilic instinct, Kay.
That's right. It's the anxiety that arises specifically when the mind's own capacity for thinking, for understanding, for knowing is felt to be inadequate to the task at hand.
The fear of not being smart enough, or of facing something incomprehensible.
Exactly. It's the terror associated with confronting the limits of your own understanding, the inability to grasp a complex or threatening reality, or maybe the deep shame associated with realizing what you don't know, what you can't figure out. The very capacity for thinking itself becomes a source of dread.
And societies, the source suggests, develop ways to manage this internal individual dread, using external structures, social defenses.
Yes, societies create mechanisms, often unconsciously, to contain or deflect this potentially paralyzing anxiety. The source highlights the example of highly competitive ranking systems, particularly in education.
Like standardized testing, class rankings.
Those kinds of systems, they function in part as social defenses against epistemic anxiety. How? By dividing not only the rewards, good grades, prestige, but also the penalties, bad grades, shame.
How does that manage the anxiety?
They effectively project the anxiety and shame of intellectual failure onto those who are ranked lower. By clearly demarcating winners and losers, the system assures those at the top of their intellectual honor and capability, thereby externalizing and displacing the internal terror that maybe they too are inadequate, that maybe reality is too complex to grasp. The anxiety of knowing gets channeled and managed through the competitive structure.
Temporarily alleviating the existential dread for the winners, maybe?
While institutionalizing the sense of shame or inadequacy for the losers, it's the way society collectively, if often unconsciously, tries to cope with the fundamental anxiety associated with the limits of human knowledge and understanding. #outro.
Wow. Okay, so after diving this deep, what does this all really mean for us? For you listening, trying to navigate your own complex reality as one of these, well, potentially fragmented individuals.
It seems the big takeaway is that the road to genuine self-knowledge, to becoming that unified self Nietzsche talked about, it's just not paved with clear, simple, rational thought.
Definitely not. It feels more like a really complex journey.
A journey of integrating contradictions, like that thief belief, of maybe recognizing the true source of our deepest guilt, not in harsh self-judgment, but in repressed love.
And constantly fighting, it seems, against all these internal and external forces that are always pushing towards mental fragmentation.
Yeah, I think the core lesson from this whole philosophical deep dive is really the perpetual human challenge of integration.
Integration on multiple levels.
Whether we're dealing with a confusing, false, unconscious bluff that we need to acknowledge, maybe with irony and acceptance, or navigating these big political anxieties that are partly driven by our own internal destructiveness, or even just engaging in the process of therapy or self-reflection, the ultimate human project seems to be this constant move towards a more unified self, a self that's capable of that highest form of self-conscious thinking we discussed.
Where practical reason, that logo's making, is applied robustly, maybe even playfully, directly to the mind's own often chaotic workings.
Exactly. Applying reason to the irrational within.
And we close with that really powerful concept from the later developments in psychoanalysis, the idea that psychic health really depends on real relating, in which the other is thought of as separate.
Yes, that capacity for genuine intersubjectivity, seeing the other as a distinct center of experience, as a key human excellence, and linking that back to the idea of conscience being rooted in non-excluding love, not the superego's judgment.
Right. So if psychic health relies on that kind of relational excellence, seeing the other as separate, yet connecting through love.
And if true conscience, rooted in that love, strives for non-exclusion, for reunion, for universal connection,
Then we're left with a fundamental tension, aren't we? A potential conflict.
it seems so. What happens when this deeply personal need for singular, wholehearted, non-excluding love, say, for our family or closest friends, where we feel that deep connection? What happens when that comes into conflict with the demands of universal justice? Justice is often defined by its impartiality, its fairness, something we're supposed to owe indifferently to everyone, regardless of personal connection.
Can you fully achieve that deep personal relational excellence of love for the particular few without somehow undermining the necessary universal demands of impartial justice for all?
Or conversely, can you be truly just in a universal sense without cooling or compromising that particular wholehearted love? Can one be fully achieved without potentially undermining the other?
That tension, that potential conflict between integrating personal love and universal morality.
That's a profound question. Definitely one worth pondering long after this deep dive